Welcome to this presentation. In the Sustainable Development Goals, there are two important goals that are related to the topic of this presentation, gender and media. The goal number 5 and goal number 10. Goal number 5 is dealing with gender equality and goal number 10 is about reducing inequality. The gender and the media is one of the highly probed topic. You might have seen and you might have read the background information, the literature related to gender and media in our course. Because though the population has more or less equal representation of diverse gender representation, though we have biological differences, but primarily the social dynamics is different from the biological composition of the population. The social hierarchies, the social relationship, the power dynamics, all playing a crucial role in the position of different segments in a society. So in this presentation, we are dealing with gender media, particularly about news and journalism. Why do we need to talk about journalism and the gender? Particularly in a news operation, the primary concern is we need to maintain equality and diversity. The opinion cannot be homogeneous. One-sided opinion is a problematic in a news. If it is a male dominated or if it is a female dominated, then we are not objective. The primary functions of any newspaper or television channels are to give unbiased presentation of information. Of course, opinions are allowed. We have the freedom. We have the scope of providing our opinion in every possible way. But the news platform should maintain the balance. If there are a good number of representation comes from one gender, and equally that number of presentation has to be represented by other gender. Maybe they may agree, they may disagree, that's a different matter. It's a platform, in the news platform, be it a newspaper or electronic media or online. The balance has to be maintained. That's called equality. And if the balance means diverse opinion will come, we'll have a diversity. Multiple opinions, multiple perspective can be given. That saves the newspaper or television's own opinion about the particular issues. So primarily, any news media platform, they have to maintain the balance, they have to provide the diversity. That exactly matching the two sustainable development goals. In the social setup, due to multiple factors, the gender balance is highly skewed towards one or other. Not necessarily one developing countries or developed countries across the world. In this presentation, we will share more examples. You will understand the different dynamics of the power play between different gender relationship. And here, we are going to take up two important dimensions of gender and media, more specifically towards journalism and news practices. One, we will discuss more about participation of women in the production of news. That's the one. The role of women in the making of news. Another one, the portrayal and representation of women in various news contents. You can see the differences between these two. One, how many number of staff, women staff members, male staff members are participating in the production of news. Secondly, portrayal and representation of gender in various news contents. In this presentation, we mean the gender between male and female. Since these two are very dominant discourses in the media domain, we have taken only these two aspects in this presentation. You will find the discussion, the literature and opinion about other gender in other presentation and other literature part of this course. The sociology of news is the major concern in any media operations. The media and communication platform, popularly used to term it as a mainstream media system, is primarily a commercial operation. They are operating the media system for sake of profits, entertainment, news and education, diverse set of media content packaged in different formats for sake of selling the products. They are making profit out of the content, and news is one of the content. And the main operation of the newspaper or television channel, many of them are commercial in nature, the private entities, is to provide information to the society. The various segments of the media operation work in the areas of providing information, facilitating entertainment, and some of the groups even provide educational content too. Here in this presentation, we are focusing mainly on information content that is being created in reality context, the news, and the role of women in that space. As you are aware that major journalism practices are disseminated either through newspaper or through radio or through television or through online. Film is not part of the news operation, and we have not considered that in this presentation. We are focusing mainly on print, electronic media and online. The news institution's primary functions are to collect, to edit and disseminate the information through various news media outlets to the vast majority of the readers. So that's the primary functions of any news outlets. So that's the purpose of the news outlet, providing information, and they have multiple stages of producing the content. But multiple stages of producing content, but the selection of news, selection of information, and incorporating that news and information in the main story, and that story goes to the newspaper or to the television's prime time packaging program. That whole process involved with multiple number of people, and everywhere there are number of stories are killed, number of stories are included. Actually, the more number of stories are killed, very selective stories are going into the newspaper or television story. So what makes this kind of decision, and who makes the decision, on what basis they make a decision? This is how the portrayal and the representation come into the picture. The selection process is a judgmental process. Journalism practices doesn't operate in a vacuum. It needs to follow all the norms of the society. They have to fulfill the social institution, the legal system, either the legal part or ethical part. They have to follow a standardized norms which is acceptable to all the sections of the society. Every news organization uses a set of values while judging the news stories. The judgment basically done by the staff, the editorial staff, while selecting one news item that may be better than other one. So a lot of stories editorial team collects multiple number of stories from their own correspondence or from the agencies or from the government press releases or from multiple sources. The stories are bombarded in the editorial team. Their responsibility is to make a judgment which one is better, which one is suitable for their audience, which suits their editorial policy. So a proper judgmental process goes through each and every selection of stories, and they'll compare with each other, and their particular stories are better than other one, and that selected story goes to the further processing part. All this part, the editorial team has to be convinced that particular news information is meeting the criteria of proximity, relevance, prominence, timeliness and impact. These are news values. Based on, these are not a very standard format that every story has to fulfill all the criteria, but at least you should meet one or two major criteria, and while selecting the story, editorial team will follow all these conditions before killing the story or before accepting the story. There is another criteria in which news for being generated that is called news frames. One, news values, and based on the values, stories are identified for the prime time or identify the newspaper, or values are applied to kill the story. Second criteria in which stories are accepted or rejected in the editorial process is the news frames. News values is a criteria for judging the story. News frame basically involved in the making of the story. For example, the frames can be simply described as an angle or perspective from which a story is being generated. We will go through the frames in detail. News production is a very complex process. It's a reconstruction of reality with the support of various tools such as reporters' personal observation, inputs from the reliable sources and witnesses, and documentary support, and many more. All these data collection tools, the reporter collects and collate and put it in a story and making a package, either for newspaper or for television, as per the medium in which the reporter works. Here, in each tool, either it's a reporter's observation or the source, witness, a documentary support, press release, background information, and there could be a considerable level of variation in terms of quality, in terms of the inputs. Every person, the witness, the source, they may have a different agenda, they may have different understanding. The reporter may take it in a different level. The choice of the sources, the reporter's perspective, the reporter's own understanding and ideological perspectives, personal opinions, all these factors play a crucial role while shaping a tone of a story. Though it looks like a very complex process, but it happens consciously or unconsciously while the story is being developed in the editorial team. Every factor is playing a role in making a story. If you look at the very collectively, then you'll understand that how a particular issue is being portrayed. So that's what we are going to look into, that how gender is being portrayed in the news. With all this background, before taking into the actual reality in the newsroom, what's happening in the male and female presentation in the news content, understand this news value and what basis the news is being selected, and news frames and what basis a story is being conceived, story is being constructed, story is being produced. So frames and news values are very crucial while understanding the portrayal of content in the news area. So this is an individual role of news reconstruction. Besides that, we are talking about reporters, understanding, ideological perspective, opinions, and everything there. But besides that, there is a news organization's institutional role, such as newsroom practices, policies, and constraints of resources. More importantly, news organizations' external relationship with the various institutions, political players, and stakeholders. Multiple social institutions are interlinked with a news organization. The individual reporter's role while constructing a story, once the story is constructed, that goes to the news values. Editorial team take the stand on to accept or to reject. While accepting or rejecting, the editorial team takes care about all these external factors like news organizations' policy, ownership pattern, their relationship with the political parties, their relationship with the audience segment, and advertising the stakeholders. All these matters, all these factors play a crucial role in identifying a story and accepting the story and packaging the story into the typical newspaper format or in the television studio format. These factors, either individual factors or organizational factors, playing a crucial role in the news gathering and news production process. In the whole process, reality is being reconstructed. Please remember that the news is not reproduced as it is. The news has happened somewhere and observed by somebody, recorded by somebody, rewritten by somebody, and packaged by someone. It goes to multiple people, multiple stages, then reaches the audience. Now you can understand that it's a better way than the better way to contextualize the gender and their representation in news stories. You'll understand that the social reality being reconstructed and multiple peoples are involved. Their opinion, their understanding, their knowledge level, organizational structure, all are involved in representation of an issue, representation of gender in the journalism practices. Numerically, male and female population has an equal size. There may be minor variation here and there. But in a social hierarchy and norms and values in the context of gender, power relationship, the male dominates the newsroom setup. That's across the global pattern. Male dominates the news editorial team, not in the particular Indian context or in a particular European context. But if you look at the global context, this is how it's being recorded in multiple reports. Besides the prevailing the social conditions, the environment in which the news collections are operated has a significant influence on the framing of gender in the news stories. For example, how a news story is being investigated and reported, the method of collection, the method of information gathering, the choice of supporting documents, how a reporter selects the sources, what kind of questions are being asked to the sources, and more importantly, how all these informations are interpreted. The news frames plays a role in all this process. Similarly, a reporter's background, educational setup, gender, class, editor's role, owners, their gender, their class, and audience segment can influence the news production process. Another important point needs to be noted here is that journalists often depend on institutional resources such as police, courts, politicians to supply the stories or information. As a social pyramid grows, the significance of power goes up. In all practical purposes, in any social setup, in the higher power system, the equality of gender roles are not balanced. In this kind of skewed environment, the reporters are relying on higher power structure, which is male dominated. The sources or stories or information comes from politicians or comes from the bureaucracy, comes from executives, which are considered to be a male dominated. Then automatically information has a potential to take a biased approach. So if you look at that, news portrayal of gender is not a standalone process. The social reality, the social institutions, social players are playing a crucial role in the news making process. Now you got the idea of how a story is being produced within the realms of various social, political, organizational, and individual factors. A news story is being filtered through all these frames and values and get a place in the newspaper or television or in the online platforms. A news organization comes out hundreds of stories in a day. Each story has to go through all these filters. Collectively, these news organizations play a major role because with all these conditions, news is being produced and disseminated to the society. With this filtering and processing, news is being given to that. Through that, the newspapers or television or online medium playing a role in shaping our opinion, our attitudes. They are identifying our public discourse. They are determining the public discourse and thereby shaping our political, cultural, economic priorities. They are influencing our public policy. They are reinforcing or challenging the gender, racial, other stereotypes and serve as the channel through which public communicates to the policymakers and through which policymakers communicate to the public. Media can act as a catalyst for social change through coverage of injustice and inclusion of voices of those often find their voices are marginalized. Remember that the marginalized voices needs to be placed in the newsroom has to go through all the filters and the frames and values which are dominated by a particular segment of the society. Around the world, journalism remains a male-dominated industry in which women workforces make up a smaller percentage of the newsroom staff than the men. There are various factors that determine the lower representation of women workforce in the editorial operations. Besides multiple social filters that influence the news operation, the male dominated editorial system has its own consequences while producing news stories. Particularly, its significance is enormous on the topics related to gender issues. There are various studies conducted over the period of time, and these systematic research findings reveal the influence of multiple social filters and the nature of newsroom operation on gender issues. Men and boys were represented more often than women and girls in the both images and text. Very interestingly, the proportion of females were consistently higher in images than in text. You need to question the reason for this higher proportion of representation of females in the visual elements in virtually in all the topics on all the news outlets. In order to support our argument of why men dominate women in the news content, and particular reference to the higher proportion of female portrayal in visual elements, here I would like to quote two research outputs. One comes from University of Brazil and Cardiff University. When women do show up in the news, it is often seen as eye candy, thus reinforcing women's values as a source of visual pleasure rather than residing in the content of their views. Another study by American Sociological Review stating that the media focuses nearly exclusively on the highest strata of occupational and social hierarchies, in which women's representation has remained poor. Another important data comes from a study named as Global Media Monitoring Report. Global Media Monitoring Report is a very long longitudinal study. It's being carried out since 1995. The latest report came in 2015. The 2015 report stating that female reporters wrote an average of 37% of stories, while their counterpart, the male reporters, wrote nearly 63% of the stories. See the difference, 37% from female and 63% of news is being generated by male counterparts. This shows an increase of 9% since the first study. When they studied in 1995, the percentage of females' contribution as a reporter, it was 28% and male was 72%, but got changed in 2015 to 37 to 63. More specifically, women reported 41% of stories on radio, 38% of stories on television, 35 stories on the newspaper. See the chronologically it's reducing, 41 in radio, 38 in television, 35 in the newspapers, showing that women remain in the most underrepresented in the newspapers. The study also found that 51% of men and 57% of women are participating in the news content. Here, see the difference, 51% male, 57% is a female. As we stated earlier, the female always takes higher representation in visual content. It's being reinforced in television, 57% of female in television. Higher percentage of stories presented by women on television is often attributed to the focus on women's appearance on television. The same Global Media report found that female reporters most frequently report stories on the topic of science and health, with the 50% of the stories on the topic reported by women. On the opposite side, female reporters least frequently cover stories on politics and government. Only 31% of stories on this being covered by the women, mostly on soft stories and science and health. Rarely they cover the politics and the government. These findings confirm concerns that female reporters continue to confined by covering soft stories, and while male reporters are covering more important hard news, which is eventually leads to the promotion. Okay, it is unclear whether more women in the newsroom will change the news content, but in a Global Media report showed that the female reporters tend to use more female sources than the male reporters. Another study, International Women's Media Foundation's global report found that men make up 64% of news workers than the women, who makes up only 35%. That shows the There is a resemblance of Global Media Report and the International Women's Media Foundation part. The majority is dominated by the male counterparts and the minor representation by the women, 65% and 35%. The study also found that men make up 73% of top management positions, compared to women takes only 27% in the top management position. According to the report, most women work at the level of senior professionals, indicating a class ceiling at the level. The report also found that 67% of men are employed on the regular basis, whereas 33% of women are similarly employed on a regular basis. Again, there is an imbalance. The female reporters are especially facing an uphill task as a war reporter or sports reporter or opinion columnist. Again, the opinion columns, editorial pages or sports or war area, this being dominated by the male rather than the female gender. That's how we saw the role of women participation in generating content. Now we will look at the second most important point, the portrayal of women in the news content. Now we move on to that part area, and particularly we move on to the online field. We have seen in the newspaper and television, now look at the online field. In the normal newsroom operations are being male dominated due to various reasons. Online and digital must be providing a suitable platform for equality and diversity. Unfortunately, in the online field, number of male users dominates the number of female users. Moreover, online platforms are reflection of social realities. The power structure and hierarchy are being reproduced in the online platform, and women's participation and experience of online spaces have been explored extensively. The research shows that the political blocks, a political contribution in the social media is being dominated by the men. Similarly, Wikipedia is overwhelmingly edited by men, with the mainstream media blaming the women themselves not participating. Female journalists and bloggers are also frequently experiencing harassment and threats in the online field. Now we will come to the second important point in our presentation, the women's portrayal in the news. So far we have seen the discussion about the women's participation in the news workforce, and which is male dominated, is being established in multiple segments. Now we will understand the significance of portrayal of women in the news stories. Again, we will go back to the Global Media Monitoring Report, provides some very helpful data in this regard. The most recent study, the 2015 report, stating that women make up only 24% of the news space, be it in the newspaper or in the television, whereas 76% of the space is given to the other gender, particularly male. This number has been increased from 1995, it was just 17% for women. Now in 2015, it is 24%. And over the period of time, there is a significant level of growth, but still, it's just 24 and 76%. The function of women in news stories is more often to provide a personal experience, least often as an expert. And the stories are analyzed, women are represented as victims, whereas men were always represented as victims in only 80%. Women represented a victim as more, 16% percentage of women are represented victim, whereas in the male it's just 80%. Women were frequently identified as a family status than the men, and more frequently shown in the newspaper photograph than in the men. As like the visual medium, visual platform, male takes a very minority role than the female part. More portrayal of women in the visual platform, photograph and television. Women dominates on the lifestyle pages, but do not feature much on crime and sports. They are also far less likely to be seen on the front pages. The critical mass of women in journalism at all levels is important in ensuring greater multiplicity of voices. At the moment, there is a disproportionate lack of female resources, female experts, and women as being considered as an unworthy in the newsroom part. That's why the less representation in the front page, less representation in the opinion columns, less in the war, less in the sports area. So with that, we are concluding the presentation. We have seen the women's participation in the news production, well, the male-dominated one, and we have seen the portrayal of women in how they are represented in the soft news, not in the hard news, and less in the sports, less in the opinion, less in the editorial page, less in the front pages. This is not a particular to newspaper or television, it's being represented in all the news media outlets. That needs to be rectified. That's one of the reasons why Sustainable Development Goals 5 talking about empowerment of women through ICT. At least the online platform is being given opportunity to balance the imbalance. Similarly, goal number 10 talking about reducing inequality. So with this background of news values and news frames and the real life data of male and female relationship in the newsroom platform, you will understand that the role of gender in the journalism practices. Thank you.